So welcome everybody. I am here with some very special guests that really don't need introduction. But in case you're listening on a podcast, I'm going to tell you who they are. We've got Richard Grannon from the Spartan Life Coach, and we've got Angie Atkinson from Queen Being, and Dana Morningstar from Thrive After Abuse. And these are the experts that taught me in the very beginning. I remember, Dana, all of your red flags. I had never even heard of red flags, and you changed my life. And Angie, you are just an inspiration to me so much. We both have a marketing business, and we both kind of gravitated by life, this kind of thing. And Richard, you are just awesome. I was really excited to meet you last year, and your work is amazing. So welcome, all of you.
Thank you.
Today, my topic is, I want to talk about victim versus victimhood, because I've had people come into my meetups and into my groups, and they're extremely offended by the word victim. And for me, I don't think I was able to heal until I understood that I was a victim. And that's how it is for me. But I know a lot of people are offended by that. So let's talk about how you feel about the word victim.
I like that.
Go ahead.
All I was going to say is I think it's an accurate description of what happens, in the same way when I used to work at a probation service and when I used to teach self-defense. Somebody was the victim of a crime and they had been beaten up. It's the same thing. This is being beaten up psychologically and emotionally. So the idea that you're a victim, I think, is just something that you're going to have to get past. It's just a word. So I would, if a client came to me saying I don't like the word victim, then I would say, why not? Let's talk about the word victim. Sorry, Angie, I cut across you there.
Oh, I kind of agree with you. I think for me, it's about knowing that, yes, okay, now I've discovered the problem. Now I know I'm a victim of this issue, but not living in victimhood. You know what I mean? There's a difference. I know plenty of people, I'm sure you all do too, where you have victims. They're like professional victims, always on Facebook. Oh, poor me, everything's terrible. Always, having some drama. And if it's not their own drama, feeling victimized by some other drama that happened in someone else's life. And to me, it's terrible. It's a way to stay stuck. So I think, yes, identify yourself as a victim first, but then become, a survivor and then a thriver, or whatever you want to call it. Don't live in that victim role. That's how I feel.
And Dana?
It's interesting that people have a problem with the word. I'm sorry, there's an echo.
Tracy, I was going to say before, you need to turn that volume down a little bit more, because every time you speak, you kind of sound like God.
Awesome.
All right. She sounds like God. That's good.
Goddess.
There.
Sorry. Obviously.
How's that?
It's still there a little bit.
You know what? I'll hit mute when someone else is talking.
Let's try that. Good idea.
Should we all do that?
Just fixed it.
That might be a good idea. Okay, much better. Okay, so what do I think about the word victim? It's interesting that people struggle with defining themselves as a victim or even using that word. I've noticed the exact opposite, where a lot of people aren't comfortable with other people referring to themselves as a victim. So I don't know. I think if people are more comfortable using the word target, then that's okay. I think whatever language that they want to use to define their experience is fine. Like Richard and Angie both were saying, it's more, I think these words are pointers. And I like how Richard was talking about, okay, then it kind of opens up the conversation about being a victim. I think people that might struggle with identifying as a victim might feel that way because like, well, I was a willing participant in this relationship. So maybe that's part of it, or maybe it's also having to do with denial, that things are really this bad. But I like the idea of it's a starting point for discussing victimization and abuse and all of that. And then like Angie said, giving people that level of awareness of, even though we were victimized, we don't have to stay there. Like, we can start shifting forward. I mean, that was such a huge aha moment for me, was to realize that there was life past this. And I didn't know how to shift out of that. So I think getting some of these tools to be like, okay, what's the next step? How do I move into not just surviving this, but actually thriving from this, is huge.
Yeah, I agree. I think that, again, for me, that was the defining moment when I learned I was a victim. And when I went through some counseling for domestic violence, I had that aha moment. And it was also a really scary word to actually say. And a target was certainly a lot easier to digest. To know that I was targeted for my vulnerabilities and for my assets. And I don't know, people that get stuck there are having a hard time moving on. So again, it's that moving through victim. It's moving and accepting that it happened, but I don't want to be there. I don't want to live there. And I think we all have Facebook groups where we have so many members that are in a loop. They can't ever get out. They are talking and they're not actually doing a lot of work. And I think a key to moving past it is to recognize it, accept it, and just say goodbye. One of the things that happened recently was a friend of mine was beginning to date. And the person that he was thinking of dating said that he had such a good story that when she heard it, she was going to cry. And to me, I thought, red flag. Like, I've had a terrible story, but I would never preface a dating site by saying you're going to cry when you hear my story. So what do you guys think about that? Did that sound like victimized?
I mean, I think I've seen that. My ex-husband, I knew he was going to do it. He did it with me. He walked around with a picture of myself and my now 21-year-old child for several years. My wife took my son away from me. Poor me. And that's literally, I'm pretty sure, how he got his next 3 wives. You know, and I think a lot of us have fallen for I fell for the sob story originally. And I think a lot of us have done that over the course of the years, because a lot of us tend to be very sensitive, kind people, and we care about other people. And so when somebody tells us a good sob story, we feel for them. We want to help them. We want to prove the idea that life is, or that people are inherently evil, wrong, and show them that, hey, look at us, we're nice people. And I think they see that as a way to take advantage. You know, I think it's a common tactic used by not just narcissists, but toxic people in general. And I would agree with you. That was a huge red flag.
There's something that Dana said before. If you see me doing this on my fingers, it's because it's 11:30 at night. And when I'm trying to think and listen, my whole operating system slows down. Also, there are mosquitoes attacking me. So there'll be me counting and flapping my hands. Dana said before that the use of the word victim when a client says they don't like it, that there's 2 things that might have happened there. One is they might still be in denial. So me in coaching mode jumps on that. I'm like, oh, the client's in denial. And the second thing she said that's absolutely correct is you might not have wanted to accept. I don't know how you phrased it, Dana. That you were a willing participant. And in my head, I was like, the coaching side of me wants to jump forward and go, no, because you weren't, because you didn't know, did you? Because you didn't sign up for it. Because if they had told you what they were going to do, you would have said no, thank you. And that's really important. So I can't help but ask Tracy, like, why do you not like the word victim? Because using the word victim doesn't keep you trapped in a loop of victimhood. You said that it was a frightening word. What was it that was... Now, let me preface it and make it easier. Is it the horror of what happened? Is it too in your face? Like, because it is horrifying. And that's what we as coaches do, is we take a client by the hand and go, hey, don't hide under the bed. Come with us. We're going to face this monster. It's horrifying what's happened. You've had love used against you to tear out a piece of your soul, but we can do this. Was that what was the word victim? Was it making you look at that maybe? You're still on mute, by the way.
I think, yeah. I don't feel it anymore. This is 3 years ago, but I think at the beginning, I had just been arrested. So yeah, that's the day after that was when I learned about narcissists and victims, and that was a horrific thing. So to learn all of that at once was like, wait, I'm the good girl. What did I do wrong? How did I become that? And the realization for me was, it's been happening your whole life. And so that's why you didn't see it. You didn't know. And so to find out, over the years, unpack the onion and go, it's not just the man that had you arrested. It's the rest of your life that you have been subjected to people that have been abusive to you. So for me, I am all at peace with living in victim while you're there, but moving out as fast as possible. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I think it's about perception, of yourself and the situation. And I think when we start to change our perception intentionally, that's when we start to grow. I'm going to stop talking so Dana can talk. Anyway.
And I think too, sometimes with the word victim, people tend to struggle with feeling like they deserve that word even. Like, well, I mean, yeah, I was like psychologically and emotionally and verbally abused, but I mean, I wasn't physically abused. So I guess like, I don't want to minimize somebody that's been physically or sexually abused. Like that's real abuse. And it goes back to what Richard was saying of like, let's talk about abuse, because we oftentimes, I think, feel that word victim is reserved for people that have gone through like extreme physical abuse. And so then we don't feel like our experience is valid. There's lots of different reasons, I guess, people aren't comfortable with that word. But yeah, and like Richard was saying too, like, even though we were a quote unquote willing participant in this relationship, people say, well, why didn't you just leave? Like if it was so bad, why didn't you just leave? And it's like, we were staying, but there wasn't informed consent. Like we didn't realize that we were being manipulated. We didn't realize what was going on. We were operating from that standard kind of map of understanding of relationships, which is, you forgive and forget, and commitment is forever, and love conquers all, and just given enough like love and understanding and rehab and therapy that a person can change. And not realizing that all of those beliefs, when given to a toxic person, will drag you straight through hell. So, but what you were saying too about your friend sharing their story and the, saying, oh, here's kind of my experience with abuse. And then the other person saying, oh my goodness, your story's so sad, it makes me want to cry. Like, oh boy, that just struck a nerve with me. To me, that struck me as how self-absorbed and minimizing. And it's like, dude, my story is not about you. And that would be a red flag if I were to open up to somebody and they were like, oh my goodness, that's just so sad. I just can't, I can't handle it. It's like, okay, then I'm not telling you this to get pity. I'm telling you this to kind of explain or to make you uncomfortable. Like I'm sharing things because so maybe you'll better understand me. That would be a red flag with dating if somebody didn't handle that well.
It shows poor boundaries, doesn't it? Very, very poor ability to handle somebody's own emotional state if they just hear a story and they're just shot off into another dimension. That's not great. It's not great.
Yeah, I agree. And I also think that in any situation, if you're dating somebody new, you're not going to want to tell them your sob story or your difficult story or your true story, like right up front. I think that's a really unhealthy way to begin a healthy relationship. And it basically, if it does happen to be a toxic person that you're dating, that person's eventually going to use that story against you anyway. So
what's a healthy way to start a healthy relationship?
Like not telling all the sad stories.
Is everybody single here?
No.
Let's just give out some dating advice.
I've been married for 13 years. What's up?
When it comes up in coaching and the client tries to minimize their experience of abuse because they didn't have their fingernails pulled out, they weren't skinned, how do you guys as coaches, what do you do to bring them back to saying, hey, no, narcissistic abuse, emotional abuse is very real. It's as real as anything else. How do you do that?
As far as, I think it's about explaining. I think what I see with people is that people, they watch the videos and they go, were you looking in my kitchen window? I'm sure you guys have heard it. And I think that's where it starts, is because they start to see that, okay, other people are experiencing almost identical things. Sometimes even the words they're using and the manipulation tactics are just identical. And I think that is the beginning of it for most people, where they start to go, wait a minute. Because for me, and I don't know about you guys, for me, I did not believe I was a real person. I believed, and this started from birth, unfortunately, for me. And so, because I was constantly invalidated, and that's why I went like this when Dana said the word invalidated, or validated or something, because it was about, I think, overcoming the false self-image that I had been fed for my whole life. And so when I share it with other people and other people are talking to me about it, you go through that whole process of what are all of these negative self-perceptions you had? Where did they come from? How do you let go of those? What do you want to replace them with? But I guess my point is, back around to your original question, let me get there. When it comes to dealing with people who don't believe they've been abused, first of all, they're probably not going to call you for coaching. But by the time they do, you kind of have to walk them through what abuse is, as Dana was talking about, as far as, when somebody treats you this way, this is abusive. When somebody constantly invalidates you or tears you down for basic, human behaviors, and, that's the beginning, and it goes on. But anyways, I'll let someone else talk now.
Dana?
Yeah, I think it's addressing that stuff up front. I think there's so much shame involved with this. And I think part of that is people feeling like their experience is less than. Even when I was working at a domestic violence shelter and women would come in that had been threatened or tried to run off the road or hit or what have you, there was still this feeling of, I'm not sure if I really belong here, because I'm not like barely hanging on to my life. Like, I'm not in the emergency room beaten to a pulp. I'm just terrified that this person's going to kill me. And so all of these different ways that we tend to kind of minimize our experiences. And so I think opening that conversation instead of waiting for people to kind of stumble into that conversation, and just saying, like, your experience is valid. Abuse is on a spectrum. All of it's incredibly damaging. An abusive relationship is a manipulative relationship. And there's tons of confusion involved. It's why people stay. It's how things get as bad as they do. And the abusive part, I've never heard a person say that the physical abuse was worse. It's always the emotional and psychological abuse is the stuff that stays with you for decades. And overcoming that is such a challenge. And just letting people know, like, it doesn't have to be so extreme that this stuff puts you in the hospital or kills you in order for it to be a valid problem. And just kind of acknowledging that, I think.
I do work with the Domestic Violence Coalition here in Colorado, and most of the people on the board that I'm on are survivors of pretty horrific things. And I think our jobs as coaches and YouTubers and authors is to educate people about those emotional abuse things, because almost everyone that comes into my groups, into my videos, they can honestly say they didn't know they were being abused because the education isn't there. And that's the key problem, I think, is that when we see abuse, we see someone punched in the face. And that's how people perceive it. That's how the people who are not in this world learning about it believe that is abuse. And they minimize the people who have been emotionally abused. They don't see that they're shaking on the inside, and anything they do or say, they question their own self. They don't know what gaslighting is. They don't know what it feels like. And so I think attached to that is really understanding all of those things, as you said. And once we get a hold of that and we change our perception from the punch in the eye to something that is very, very real and very, very crippling. And when we do that, we move to that space, then we allow ourselves to begin to heal and find out and unpeel those layers to really see how deep this thing went. It's probably not the last person in it. If you don't take care of yourself and learn, it won't be the last, because they can sniff us out like candy at a carnival. Right?
Candy at a carnival. In my last relationship, it didn't get violent until the end, until the last 2 weeks, because I was in counseling and I'd worked through stuff with my counselor, and he was like, why don't you say no? So I started saying no. And it went from the cold, kind of manipulative emotional abuse that I couldn't put my finger on and made me think I was crazy and I was in the wrong, that was extremely damaging. Like, it left damage that took literally years to heal. When she actually started screaming at me, throwing things at me, threatening me, like she threatened me at one point with a glass, I was relieved. Now, you know, I'm not, like, obviously not saying physical violence isn't a terrible thing, but being terrorized physically and psychologically is a terrible thing. And psychological violence, all the research indicates that it lasts longer. PTSD, when PTSD doesn't go away, when it malingers, it's usually because it's kind of a CPTSD response. It's an emotional response. It's psychological. The physical wounds heal, but the psychological feeling of being trapped, like you can't escape. Like, I was attacked in bed frequently. She would wait until I'd gone to sleep, and then she would scream at me in the dark. And at the time I was like, wow, this is like something out of a film. Isn't this a weird thing? But it was actually very clever. It's the kind of thing that terrorists do. They want to get you when you're sleeping so you can never feel safe. So I would then go to sleep and be like, is she going to wake me up at 3 a.m. with the screaming routine again? And it made me jumpy. It gave me sleep problems, obviously, because she trained sleep problems into me. So that's how I handle it. When it comes up, I'm like, no. Let's get this ridiculous mass media, mass culture idea out of your head that abuse is only being punched around. I mean, that is abuse as well. But psychological abuse can be very, very sneaky. And I would say that the more low key it is, the worse it is.
And I think that the longer I think, first of all, that we have to think that most physical abuse does also involve psychological abuse. And I think that as I think all of us would agree, those, like you just mentioned, the psychological scars last longer. But I would say that the reason people don't recognize is exactly what Richard said with the mass media thing. But that's why we're doing what we do, I think. And that's why I'm doing what I do, is so that the more people, you know, who watch a video that one of us made and go, are you looking in my kitchen window? And recognize that they are, in fact, at least initially, a victim, until they recognize it, you know, then they can start to move into understanding it and moving toward, you know, being done with it and taking back their life and all of that. So I think it's a matter of informing the public. I'm not even sure what the question was, but I think it's a matter of letting people know. And when people find out, how many messages do you guys get every day? You saved my life. I mean, I can't even count anymore. And that, to me, makes it worth all the trouble. You know.
I was totally going to ask you guys about that, because, you know, you're like 10 times, 100 times bigger than I am. And my email box is overwhelming. And I have to have people help me do things now, because the response and the places that people find me in, LinkedIn. I mean, like, would I expect someone to go to LinkedIn and tell me their entire story? And I remember, Richard, you used to say on your videos, people would leave you comments and there'd be no grammar, there'd be no periods, and there'd be no spacing. And that's what you're hit with every single day. Like, for me, it's hundreds of times, and I can only imagine the amount of questions that you get. How do you handle that?
Should I go first on that one?
Go for it.
3 codependents went into a pub. None of them could decide who should go first. The way I started to have to handle it, I think it's quite a while ago now, it's like 3 years ago, is I had to hire somebody to help me go through the emails. And that wasn't enough. So I just told people, stop emailing me. I just had to say, don't do it. I understand, but don't do it, because what was happening and what you'll find is people are going to email you at 3:00 in the morning when they're in an intense emotional flashback. And those gut spill essays that look exactly the same every time is somebody in peak emotional flashback, and they're blurting out, and you're hearing them at their worst. And then you can get an email from the next day like, oh, I had some breakfast and I went for a walk and I actually don't feel as bad now. I'm sorry about that. So I just say don't email in, because it's not going to help you. It's not going to help the human. You're just practicing the confusion and the overwhelm. What I would rather do is say, hey, here's a free course that helps with emotional flashbacks. Here's a free video that's going to help you to emotionally re-regulate. You need to feel supported and heard and validated, and you need to work on your own emotions. Spilling this stuff out is probably not the best thing for you. I've stopped. Over to you guys now.
Yeah, Angie, you're muted.
Go ahead.
Okay. Yeah, I didn't handle it well. When all of the emails started pouring in, I never started my blog. I never started any of this to be like a YouTuber or a blogger or anything. It was just more of like my personal venting, I thought I would just make a bunch of videos, get them out, and then that would be it. And so when then the emails began pouring in, my experience had been working at this domestic violence shelter. We had maximum 14 women at a time. And so now it was like, hundreds, dozens and hundreds of emails just pouring in, and it was absolute overwhelm. And that was how my Wednesday night live stream started. Because it was like, basically, I can't respond to all these emails. If you've got questions or you need support, I'll be here every Wednesday night for 3 hours. We can just hang out. And then it progressed into starting some support groups, and then getting help, getting admins that are worth their weight in gold in there that, help with all of this. Cause I couldn't do it all. And I mean, I was gaining weight. I was just in massive overwhelm, debilitating, to the point where I had a really hard time getting out of bed, because there's all these people in crisis and I can only do so much. And I only have so much emotional energy that I can dedicate to this every day. And that was a terrible feeling, to not be able to get back to people in crisis. So you do what you can.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. And I had a similar thing. I don't think I didn't stay in bed or anything. But I went through this huge phase when it first started to happen, where I kind of freaked out a little bit. I started trying to Google it. How do you handle all this? But nobody talks about that. So basically I ended up hiring somebody to help with the emails. That worked for a while, but it's still too much, because the people find me on Facebook, and I have right now, I think 900 friend requests sitting there, and God knows how many messages I can't read because they're on the other side of the, the other messages or whatever. I mean, I can read them, but I can't go through them all. And I think for me, what I do is I do the live streams like Dana does, and I just tell people I try to get to all the emails. I can't get to all the emails. Here are some options to reach me. We have, like Dana, the support group. We have I now have an off Facebook support site and then I have the live streams, and then now I have some group coaching things happening that are cheaper. And so I have a lot of options, and I just do my best, and I just try to tell people I'm only one person, I'm human. So here are your options. And that's part of the reason that I started coaching, because even though I had become a coach, I wasn't actively coaching. I wasn't even going to, but it just happened because so many people asked me for it, based on watching my videos. They're like, oh, she knows what I'm going through. And that's one of the biggest things, is I think when people see that you know what they're going through, they don't know anybody in real life who gets it. And so they're like, oh, I need to talk to that person. Like just last night I had somebody, and she had the cutest Southern accent, and she said, I feel like I'm talking to a celebrity. And that happens a lot. And I'm like, girl, I'm just regular like you. But it was one of those overwhelming moments. And I'm sure you guys have experienced something similar. But I guess that's what I did. I eventually had to relax about it, because I did go through this big crisis of, oh my gosh, all these people want my help. I want to help all these people. I tried for a while, but then my family was like, are you still here? Because we don't know. We can't see you anymore. So that's my take.
Well, for me, I don't get as many comments, but I will wake up to 40 or 50 of them every day. And I used to answer them every day. And as the bar is going up, and I dedicate my time to my local support groups, and I dedicate all of my time to different things, I'm not having time. And there was that guilt. There's that codependent, I want to help you. That's why I'm here. And I would answer people. I would pour out my heart to an email answer. And like you said, Richard, they are in that phase, and then you answer them and you never hear back, and I just spent a half an hour giving them what I had, and it was fruitless. And I realized that while that lifeline that they're going for, they're casting it off. And if we remember the Titanic, everyone was clawing to stand on top and hold on to someone else. And that's how these survivors are. They are lost at sea, and we're the bobbins. We're the life rafts or something. And I get that. But I know that this is a difficult journey for all of us, and we have a life, and I get that. And everyone should be appreciating all that you guys do. But if we look at the fact that we all have a story, everyone has that long story, that horrible thing that they went through. But to me, when we go out to date again, how does somebody not, I call it barfing. They barf out the story. And I gave a lesson last night on changing the story so that you don't barf it out and just meet the new person and scare the hell out of them. But how do we differentiate between that fake victim that like narcissists are and when we actually have a real story? How do we identify that and kind of protect ourselves?
I think it starts in the way that they tell the story, how soon into the relationship they tell the story, and what they expect your reaction to be about the story. Like if they have you can tell if somebody expects you to react a certain way, right? By the way that their face is, the way they hold their body, their mouth, whatever. And I think ultimately it's not really appropriate to tell all of your terrible stories on the first, second, or third date. I think when you're at a point where whether you are yourself going to share your own story or you are going to listen to someone else's story, I think it's just, I coach people to not talk about their worst things on their, I say that the only piece of information they need to know about you on the first date really is whether or not you have a child. And not in detail, but just because when you have a child, that changes a lot of things in your life. And they don't need to meet the child for 6 months. I mean, there's a whole process, but how do you tell if it's a fake story? You watch their face, but some people are really well rehearsed. I think it's time. Give it time. Don't rush into anything. Never jump into a relationship, oh, this is love at first sight, whatever. The thing is, if that person is the one, they're going to wait. And so give yourself set timelines in your mind. Like for me, I was like, well, I'm not going to, commit to anyone until like, say, after a certain amount of months, or I'm not going to have sex with someone until, say, the 6th date or 6 weeks in or whatever, or I'm not going to allow that person to propose to me until we've been monogamously dating for at least 1 year. I always had all these rules, and that worked out pretty well for me. Like I said, I'm 16 years in, 13 years in, 16 years into a relationship, 13 years into a marriage with a non-narcissist. So that's a plus. Anyway.
I think with dating, Brene Brown talks about, she has this concept of a marble jar. And it's basically that trust is something that's earned. And it's earned with appropriate behavior over a prolonged period of time. And so every time, and there's no shortcut to time, because anybody can pretend to be anything, and their stuff might even be legitimate, right? And it just takes time. So every time they handle something appropriately, every time they show up on time, every time they treat you with respect, like a marble is dropped in that jar. And then you get to that place where we were talking about earlier about letting people know your story. I'm a big fan of just kind of slowly revealing that over time and not dumping that onto a person right out of the gate. I went on one date with a guy. This was before, I don't know, probably early on in my channel. And he had Googled, we met on a dating site. He'd Googled my picture. He found my YouTube channel. He knew everything about me. And he was like this nice, normal guy who'd never really encountered anything like this. And he starts asking me about all of this stuff on our first date. And I just felt like the blood leave my face. And I was so horrified as to how much he knew about me. And I felt so incredibly vulnerable and just sick to my stomach because it was such an unequal dynamic at that point. So I try to keep this stuff kind of close to my chest until I know the person well enough. And I've learned my lesson. Like I don't openly just pour this stuff out. It makes me too vulnerable to have, to be casual about this. Like it's something that really needs to be earned over time.
Tracy, sorry, could you repeat the question just so I fully understand it? You're on mute. You're on mute, mate.
I'm on mute. I believe the question was, how does someone identify the difference between our real victim story and a narcissist claiming to be the victim, like that first example and the I'm going to make you cry story? How does someone identify? Because we do have that story. We don't have to tell it.
You mean in a dating context?
Yeah.
So how do you identify a narcissist when you're dating?
Just through the fake story part. Yeah.
The fake story bit. Honestly, in any context, if somebody told me a story like this, I would be put off totally. It wouldn't matter how the story was delivered. What I tell people is, don't discuss this stuff outside of narcissistic abuse forums. It's like we are weirdos. Okay, we're in the UFO community of psychology right now, which is a real shame. We're conspiracy theorists. And that's why I think you have a lot of mainstream psychologists. They'll steal our ideas and they'll nick stuff and they'll put it in their papers, but they'll never reference it because it's very fringe. Vice did a documentary and they involved me in it. And I realized halfway through that they were trying to portray the victims of narcissistic abuse as lunatics. And it was going to be called The Chosen Ones. And the whole thing was like these hipster, I won't swear because it's your channel, these hipster individuals saying, look at these clowns. They believe there's something called narcissists and they believe they're the victims of them. Meanwhile, they're a hive of just evil, cluster B, psychopathic narcissism themselves. The only reason they didn't do what they were planning on doing is because I had a phone call with the producer, and I don't want to incriminate myself in any way, but I said, just remember who I am. And I'm a lunatic and I've been to your offices. If you do this, there will be consequences. And they said, okay, if we release it without the title, The Chosen Ones, is that okay? And I said, no, it's not okay. If you portray the victims of narcissistic abuse as conspiracy theorist nutters, you will see me in your office. I'll turn up. Remember how you found me? And they're like, oh, okay. So they changed it. They toned it down and they cut like most of my stuff out. They tried to make me look like a cult leader. They tried to get me to run a seminar for them, which I did, so they could interview people. And at the end, they were like, do you ever do group hugs? And I said, no, I don't like being touched. And they said, give them a group hug. I said, I'm not doing that. Give them a group hug. And we had this thing where I was going, I'm not letting you get shots of me cuddling people so that you can, so there's a whole thing. So I always say to people, look, only discuss this stuff with other members of the community, because if you've not lived it and you've not experienced it, it's kind of like an alien abduction story. Your mum doesn't hate you. Mums don't hate people. Your dad didn't do that. Dads don't do that. Your wife didn't do that. Why would your wife do that? Your wife loves you. I've met your wife. She's so sweet. She loves animals, blah, blah, blah. I've lived this. So that's why I came up with the terms secondary gaslighting and tertiary gaslighting. Your well-meaning friends and family, they're going to gaslight you. Tertiary gaslighting, the therapists and counselors who sit there going, oh, so you're a paranoid nutter. Oh, you believe did you read that on the internet? Gaslighting? Really? And I've lived that. I've actually sat opposite a counselor, told her what my job was, and she came at me like that. You think this is real? I'm like, are you telling me you don't? Because we specifically agreed this is... Anyway, that's another horror story. So if somebody brought me a sob story now, because of the work that I've done more recently, I've looked more at psychopaths and narcissists. And we know that psychopaths deliberately give people, they interviewed them in the American prison system. So how do you choose your female victims? I give her a sob story. If she buys it, then I'll go with her. She's the one. So sob stories is like, I wouldn't want to hear it. I mean, anything bad-mouthing an ex-boyfriend or ex-husband, I would roll my eyes. But then I don't date. So I should have said in the beginning, you can't ask me dating questions because I think dating is evil. You're on mute still, Tracy, by the way.
I know, I was just in shock. It was a shock noise. I was like, oh my. I feel the same way about dating, and people say to me, what's wrong with you? Why don't you just move on? That's that tertiary people coming to me and saying, get over this. And to me, it's been 3 years since I've been with anyone, and I've never been happier. I am so happy in my life without the bullshit around me, without the cloud and someone having any kind of control of me. I feel like I'm taking control of my life for the first time, and that's powerful. And it's much more powerful than having someone sit on the couch and drink a beer and watch a game. I don't care. I'm happy. I have more friends than I've ever had. And to tell you the truth, they're better than they were before because these people understand me and they're not judging me. And I think a survivor can get to this point. And whether they choose to go out and date in 3 months or they really give it the time to heal themselves, I think all around we're in a better place wherever we are. We have to understand that everyone's going to have different timelines of what they want to do. But something that you said, Richard, was, and maybe Angie too, working with the domestic violence agencies. And I've gone to several domestic violence conferences, and I've been like a little kid in a candy store. Forget going to social media conferences now. Give me a domestic violence conference and I'm a happy girl, which is sick and twisted, I know. But I want to see how the other side lives. I want to see how the people that are helping the people that get punched in the face are helping, and do they care about the emotionally abused? And while there are services for people that have been emotionally abused in every single state, they don't advertise it. They don't talk about it. And when I first joined the board at the coalition, they said, just don't say that word narcissist. We will lose our funding. You can't say that. And I still am shocked at that because this is how the victims are identifying it. Look at how many millions of views you guys have. Does the Coalition Against Domestic Violence for our country have that many people that they're educating? No. You guys are the hot button to the people that are in need. So how would you think that the world should be changing to help support victims more?
Well, I see a lot of times that we don't have, I've heard many people tell me that they were thrown out of shelters even. They left their ex, they had nowhere to go, they went to a shelter, they were thrown out of the shelter. And so I think, being able, and I do understand, look, you have people who are being physically abused and so they are in more immediate danger. But at the same time, I think we need to have some more funding for these people who need to get out. There are so many people in situations where they're not low income, but they don't have any access to money. And so they can't get any help at all. And if they leave, they have no access to money. And so they're just either homeless or they're in a shelter or they're sleeping on somebody's couch. And they go, I guess I'll just stay. And they stay forever. Or they stay because they think the kids need the person or whatever. I guess my point is we have to, as a society, at some point, they're going to have to recognize this or we're all going to have to become independently wealthy and support all the people. I don't know. But I wish there was a way that we could create some sort of refuge for these people who are in these situations where they're not low income, so they can't get government help or whatever. And they can't go to a shelter, but they don't have any family because or friends because they've been isolated by the cluster B types in their life. And they just feel stuck. I see this all the time, and I know I've talked with both Richard and Dana about this at various points, and and obviously you just have to stand up and go and do it, but at the same time it's a lot harder to do that when you've got kids and you've got like a mortgage and your name's on stuff and their name's on stuff. It's a big cluster mess. So I'll let somebody else take it.
I don't know. I think it's
your turn.
Okay. Creating more resources. I mean, I have had extensive, let me just back up to that whole Vice video, because I was in that video, Richard, and I was in there for like 3 seconds, and their whole point was to basically try to invalidate me and make me look bad. So I'm sorry
about that. I'm sorry about that.
It's not your fault. I mean, but
listen, I still know where the office is. You know,
well,
I am mentally unhinged. So
well, get a few drinks in me, and I will be too. But you know, like it's infuriating coming from the side of this as a former psychiatric nurse. There is this huge disconnect between understanding personality disordered people and truly understanding the damage that they can do. And I get it, because we would have sociopaths and narcissists walk into our office. That's a lot of what we treated. And it was, first of all, you can't do anything for a personality disorder, but they don't come in as this total unhinged, manipulative wackadoo. Like that stuff takes time. You have to be emotionally invested to not see that, to have the damage done. So they come into your office and it's a bunch of small games, but you hear more of like their pity story. And so there's more of this thought of like, oh, hurt people. And they're victims too. And it's a lot of like bleeding heart kind of stuff. There's the level of enabling and justification for abusers is ridiculous. And that connection between abusers actually being personality disordered is not there. That's why they're having a hard time with that word narcissist, because people think, oh, if you're talking about narcissistic personality disorder, it has to meet the DSM criteria, which is pretty vague. So it's like, oh, is this person arrogant? Do they have a level of a grandiosity or a sense of superiority? That stuff isn't so transparent, and it manifests in a wide variety of ways. Like an abuser might not come across as looking, Mr. or Mrs. like flashy pants, and that they're super grandiose. Like they might come across, that grandiosity might come out in ways where they have that sense of entitlement, that they can treat other people however they want and expect to be continually forgiven and multiple chances. And so this stuff, like Richard was saying, this is fringe stuff and it's groundbreaking stuff. But right now we are the weird ones. And the challenge with this, with a lot of like mental health community as well as other people, is when we start using labels like narcissist or sociopath, it's this idea of like, oh, well, you're pathologizing them, or who are you to diagnose them? Or then the conversation shifts into focusing on the diagnosis. Like, well, but do they really meet like the 3 out of the 5 criteria or the 5 out of 7? And I don't know, but then this and that. And it's like, now you're off in the ditch. Like none of the labels are pointers. It's the behavior that matters. If a person's got sociopathic traits, if they're lacking empathy, lacking remorse, you feel like you're in danger around them. It's all of this, the behaviors are what's important. And that's where the education, I feel, really needs to focus. And focusing on, is it a narcissist or a sociopath, or is it this, or is it that, or is it, if they're borderline personality disorder, well, if they get DBT therapy, then can they change? And all of this stuff, it's just splitting hairs, and it gets people way off into the bushes. And
they're not qualified to go there either. They really shouldn't. It's an academic exercise. I like it. I like the circle jerk, academic, intellectual pomposity of it. I really enjoy it, but it's made up. Humans made it up. They just sat there, listened to some other humans and went, well, it seems to be this. And then other ones go, we disagree. And people are acting like it's a toxin or a virus, or we can test their urine.
Yeah.
It's made up. It's made up, totally made up. It's an ongoing argument amongst fusty old professors who are arguing because they want tenure, they want their books to be published, and they want to raise their salary. Psychology is a well, in terms of like morality, it's kind of a bit of a cesspool, really. It's not a proper science. I love it, and I think it should be scientific. And if people want to argue the DSM and the traits, then I think that's fun. But there's no need for the victims, the targets of narcissistic abuse, seeking to recover, to ever end up in that ditch that you mentioned. It is a ditch, and they should stay out of that ditch.
And that's my frustration with a lot of therapists, is these words are pointers. So if somebody comes into their office and they're saying, my ex is a narcissist, my ex is a sociopath, I think they're seeing it as, oh, you're pathologizing them. This was a bad relationship. Basically, you're not qualified to diagnose. I am. So the unintended consequence of that is it's so incredibly invalidating of another person and their experience. And it's more important to focus on, what are they trying to say? What behaviors are they grasping to try to articulate, and focusing on that. But back to the education piece, the shelters do get funding. And that was when I was working at a shelter, maximum time a person could spend there was 90 days. And they had for funding reasons, in order for us to get reimbursed, they had to meet certain criteria. So, we were generally at max capacity. And the shelters all over the United States are generally at max capacity. But the emotional abuse, the psychological abuse, here's the thing with physical abuse. Physical abuse is always a late form stage of abuse. It always is preceded by verbal, emotional, or psychological abuse. And there's also generally like financial and spiritual and sexual abuse in there as well. So by the time a person's being hit, all of that other stuff has been occurring for a while, because abuse is progressive and it tends to be progressively worse over time, not better. So I would love to see some sort of like training program for both mental health workers as well as people that are in shelters to break the cycle. Because knowing what I know now, the tools that because I used to teach classes on this stuff. The tools that I used to teach back then, it really would not have helped a person break the cycle. Like, they really need to understand manipulation, like what it is, how it happens, their vulnerabilities, how those things are exploited, the hooks that keep them in, developing a plan to get out and stay out, how to stand on their own 2 feet. There's so much more that needs to be taught that isn't being taught. And like Angie was saying, I think this is our goal. This is our passion and our obsession with doing this stuff.
And something that I would like to just throw, am I the only parent in this group today? You're a parent, Tracy, that's right. Okay. Well, one thing I tell people all the time, and I'm sure you probably do as well, is that, we might not be able to change the people who are already walking around in the world as cluster Bs or toxic people or whatever. And let me just say really quick on that. I don't think the label matters at all. I think if the person's toxic to your life, then get out. But that's all I'm going to say about that. But I tell people all the time, we can't change the people who are already walking around acting this way. But what we can do is, with our children, we can teach them empathy. And we can, if everybody teaches their children empathy as we move forward, eventually maybe we can phase out this whole narcissism thing, this whole toxic B thing, cluster B thing, because I think what happens is that narcissists beget narcissists sometimes. Sometimes they beget codependents, obviously. But if we stop it in our own, bloodline or whatever you want to call it, then that's one less in the world, and maybe they'll teach their children right, and we can break the cycle slowly over the course of several generations. I think it's important.
I agree. I think that it is something that it's a snowball. It's going down the hill. It's just getting bigger and bigger every day. But the key is to change the next generation. It's to save those mothers that are going to get into another relationship so the child doesn't witness that. It's to educate the father how to co-parent with a narcissist so that the child doesn't get injured. There's so much in here, and I know that we are coming up on time, and Richard is in Thailand, and it's probably 1:30 in the morning now, so I want to be really respectful of your time. All of you have been wonderful. Thank you. Richard has something to say there.
Oh, I was just saying, I don't mind. I like doing this stuff. It's good karma.
I think it's all good karma. What you guys have done for the world is really, truly amazing. And with every person that you help, let's hope that they each help one more person, because that's how it's going to grow. That's how it's going to go down, is not the ball of everyone learning, but the ball of everyone helping each other and educating their neighbor when their husband's being a whack job to, hey, look this up. and maybe they can all get some help. Does anyone have any last things they want to say?
Trust yourself, trust your intuition again, or maybe for the first time ever. And if someone makes you feel horrible every time you experience any time with them, or the majority of those times, start thinking about moving forward and away from that person. Have standards and boundaries and stick to them. Stand behind them.
Sound advice. That's good advice. You're on mute, Tracy. You're on mute, mate. Tracy, you're on mute. You're muted. Oh, fuck. How dare you? How dare you? My precious ears.
That was such a good thing. You missed it all. It was so good.
It looked great. You were like this and then like this. I was like, wow.
I'm a little bit like, yeah. I think what I said was, I am so thankful for you guys, because you helped so many people, because you've helped me, and because we're going to change the world. And I'm just a little minnow coming up the stream here, and I appreciate all of you taking the time to talk with me, and let's go save somebody, okay?
Thank you.
Thanks.